We will be sending out the link to everybody afterwards. So definitely feel free to come in and out if you need. But again, this will be shared with you as well as the deck. And we'll get started here in a little bit.
That's exactly right. Should I go ahead and share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Can everyone see me, hear me?
Sounds good over here.
Okay. Can you see the deck now?
Perfect.
Google Meet. Enter the meeting pin followed by the pound key.
Looks like we got a lot of people tuning in once again, which is awesome. It's very cool for me as a dietitian to know that so many of you are interested in learning more about nutrition and willing to take an hour out of your, what I'm sure are very busy days to
Finding the info here.
tune in.
Yeah, they sent me a picture, so I'm just going to send you the picture, but
So if everyone could make sure that they're muting their mic as we admit more people, just make sure as a courtesy that you have that muted. And then when you have a question, you know, there'll be moments for questions. Alyssa, I think you'll probably pause in between segments for questions, just to be mindful of time. And if you want to use the chat, I can also facilitate that chat with anyone who wants to put that in the question area in the chat. If you don't want to speak up, that's totally fine. But we'll get started about 1 more minute. And like I said, we are recording today, so this will be available for you afterwards. Make sure again that you mute your mic once you enter in, and we will provide this link, recording, and slides for the deck afterwards.
Yeah, and if you
Go ahead and
Amy, that would be helpful. Yeah.
there you go. Sorry, my volume was down.
Yeah, I can't see the chat, so if you don't mind keeping an eye on that, when I pause after each section, I'll see if anyone wants to ask questions, and if you see anything that you want to ask on people's behalf based on the chat, definitely go ahead and do that.
Yep, and I'm getting everybody admitted here. Everyone's popping in now, so I'll be doing that during the meeting. Just an introduction, this is Alyssa Palladino. This is our registered dietitian. She's been working with me and our company, Corporate Health Unlimited, for quite some time now. And we're excited to have the second part of our series today, Ditch the Diet, where she's going to be debunking some of your top diets out there, fads and trends, giving you the lowdown on all of those, because I know we're all a little confused by everything that is out there. So she's going to hopefully break through some of these things, give you some guidelines on how to go about a balanced diet instead of some of these, you know, drastic things. I know I'm excited about a couple of things like keto and intermittent fasting. A lot of stigma and a lot of conversations about that. So we're really excited to have her. Again, if you'll just hold your questions for in between the segments, and we'll get to those periodically throughout the presentation. So I'm going to hand that on over to you, Alyssa. Thanks for for doing this for us.
Thank you for that intro, Amy, and thanks once again, everybody, for tuning in. I know you all have really busy lives and really busy work lives, so I appreciate that you're interested in hearing about nutrition and kind of spending an hour of your afternoon. And like Amy mentioned, we are going to be doing a deep dive today into some popular diets and kind of look at what they're really all about, from a truly just like scientific standpoint.
I'm looking
Um,
right now for something.
If we'll just make sure we have all of our mics muted.
Yeah. And I guess before we want to get started, like Amy said, we kind of will be looking at really like the pros and cons of a bunch of different popular diets. And I also just kind of want to clarify, if my intention is by no means to, make anyone feel bad about wanting to pursue a particular pattern of eating or being influenced by a diet, or suggest that, even if my recommendation would be not to pursue a certain diet, I also don't want to argue with your lived experience. You may have tried one of these and feel really got good on it or see results on it. So again, I'm definitely not, my intention here is definitely not to make anyone feel badly about pursuing a diet or, even again, like argue with your lived experience if it's something that's been positive for you. But I am going to be approaching each of these diets from, what a research and scientific standpoint. And that'll be kind of the first half of the presentation. We'll be looking at 10 different popular diets of the last decade, discussing the pros and cons. Then we're going to take a step back and kind of think about what are we even talking about when we're trying to decide whether a diet is something we want to follow or not. What are the criteria we should be thinking about? Then we'll kind of talk about why diets are problematic just inherently. And if I've managed to convince you, and this is building a little bit off of what we discussed last week, that maybe the whole diet mentality is problematic, and what do we do? Where do we go from there? And I'll be sharing some principles for more of a balanced, moderate, and sustainable way to think about food and eating. And after each of these sections, I will pause and see if there's any questions from you guys. Okay, so these are the 10 diets that we are going to be covering. Many of these are going to be familiar for you. Some of them may be things you haven't heard about. So keto, paleo, Whole30, gluten-free, WW, formerly known as Weight Watchers, intermittent fasting, veganism, the D.A.S.H diet, the Mediterranean diet, and the Mind diet. So the ketogenic diet, also known as keto, I would say that's probably one of the most popular diets or eating patterns currently. And really, it's exploded recently in the last couple of years, people using it for weight loss, as well as sort of secondarily diabetes management and even cancer prevention. But when it was developed back in the 1920s, it was a diet to help children manage seizures, so children who had epilepsy. It wasn't designed for weight loss or diabetes or any of the reasons while adults are pursuing it now. So that's kind of a little bit of food for thought. When you think about its inception versus its current use. And there is a lot of misconception about what it really means to eat a keto diet. It's not just low carb. It's extremely low carb. So you're restricting the calories from carbohydrates to less than 10% of your overall calories. So typically somewhere between 5 to 10% of your overall calories. But the focus is that you're getting the majority of your calories from fat. Anywhere from 75% to 90% of your calories are coming from fat. And then the rest that's not coming from fat or carbs is coming from protein. So you might be getting, sort of a moderate to low amount of protein on a ketogenic diet. When you're eating this way, when you're restricting your carbs so low, instead of burning glucose for fuel, which is the preferred energy source for our brains and for our muscles, and really for all our cells, we're running off of ketone bodies instead, which is a breakdown product of fat, as opposed to glucose, which is a breakdown product of carbohydrate. And honestly, in normal metabolism, we're using a combination of carbs and fat for fuel. We're really not ever using carbs exclusively for fuel, except when we're doing like super high intensity exercise, like HIIT style training or sprinting. And our brains actually really prefer glucose. But really, the rest of our cells are, when we're at rest, are using a combination of carbs and fat for fuel. So in practice, what this is going to look like for someone who's truly following a ketogenic diet, and there's lots of people that are trying to follow it and really more just following a low carb diet, you end up having to consume a lot of foods that are really high in fat, right? Because you're trying to get the majority of your calories from fat, not from protein or carbs. So you're focusing on cheese, cream, butter, red meat, foods like bacon, sausage, while limiting some really nutritious foods that are high in carbs. So fruit, whole grains, beans, lentils, starchy vegetables, potatoes, things like that. You can eat very small amounts of those foods, but you're keeping your carbs to less than 10% of your calories, so you can't eat a lot of those foods. So should you try it? Honestly, like, I mean, as you're going to kind of gather from the presentation, I don't really encourage any restrictive diet that is kind of inherently unsustainable, and we'll circle back to that. But keto in particular, I don't find is beneficial as far as long-term health, because exactly of the foods that it's allowing versus the foods that it's restricting. So we don't have a lot of long-term studies beyond 2 years right now as far as like cardiovascular health and even just like other health outcomes that may be impacted by a super high fat diet. But I've seen in short term people having issues with their LDL cholesterol, which increases risk for heart attack and stroke, as a direct result of having so much fat in their diet and so little fiber in their diet. Also constipation, again, because of that like lack of dietary fiber, which is going to be found in those food sources like your beans, your whole grains, your fruits, your vegetables that you're restricting on keto. And you may experience a brain fog that goes beyond that intro period. Like some people get into ketosis and they think they're thriving and they feel good. But others, if you're not fully in ketosis, are going to be kind of in that like foggy place where you're not getting enough carbs to really stay focused and for your brain to really function. And I would certainly say that a lot of people experience a decrease in their exercise performance, whether that's endurance, whether that's strength, just because, again, carbs are the preferred fuel for exercise, particularly at higher intensities and longer duration. So if you are, on keto and you're finding yourself struggling with your runs or your cycling events or your performance in the gym, that's probably no accident. Keto, another kind of popular diet, which I haven't heard quite as much about it recently since keto is kind of exploding, is paleo. But there are still plenty of people interested in this approach. The idea behind paleo is it's based on consuming the foods that our ancestors theoretically ate during the Paleolithic era, which was thousands and thousands of years ago. It encourages high intakes of protein through meat, seafood, and other animal products, as well as non-starchy vegetables and fruits. So that part of it is kind of, okay, check, that's good. Nutritious options. But the other piece is restricting these quote unquote inflammatory foods. So all grains, legumes, and dairy. I would say the main benefits of a paleo style of eating are going to come more from the fact that you're not going to be consuming as many like nutrient poor processed foods, and that you are going to be consuming more fresh foods, versus restricting some of these more nutritious items like grains, legumes, and dairy. These things, they may cause inflammation in some people, but they're not. The research doesn't really show that across the board they promote inflammation. So that's unfortunately not a really scientific rationale behind paleo. So should you try it? Okay, maybe, right? Here's the good. The focus on high quality protein, fresh fruits and vegetables, that's consistent with a health promoting diet. So that's kind of your takeaway from paleo. You're going to see benefits when it comes to your health. But in order to thrive, not just survive, which maybe in the Paleolithic era we were just trying to survive, but now we're trying to thrive. We're not hunters and gatherers anymore. We are, people with office jobs, and we have to think at a high level. So most of us benefit from incorporating more of these carb-rich whole grains, potatoes, beans, and lentils, which are restricted really without evidence on a paleo style of eating. And again, the biggest thing for me that's sort of a red flag is the lack of scientific evidence. I know it sounds scientific when you read their kind of like manifesto and stuff, but we really don't have a lot of knowledge about the types of food that was available back in that era or the health status of those that lived during that time, right? Like those people had a much shorter lifespan. That's what we do know. I mean, they lived to like 35 years. And again, kind of going back to what their lifestyles were like, they didn't necessarily need the same amount of glucose, which is the breakdown product of carbs, for the demands of their lives, which was hunting and gathering, compared to what we need now for our brains when we're doing all this kind of higher level thinking and processing. So even if it did optimize their health back then, and we don't know it did, it may not be the most beneficial way of eating for us and how we're living now. If you do choose to follow a paleo style of eating or kind of use those guidelines to guide your choices, focus on more of your lean animal protein sources to reduce saturated fat and protect your heart health. So, if you are going to be eating chicken, take off the skin. If you are going to be eating red meat, look for the cuts with less marbling or go for like a leaner cut of ground turkey or beef. The next one is Whole30, which if anyone's familiar with Whole30, I think probably some of you are. It's sort of similar to paleo as far as what it promotes and what it restricts. The focus is on unprocessed whole foods, such as vegetables, fruits, animal proteins, nuts and seeds, while eliminating sugar, alcohol, and a number of other foods, including lentils, grains, and dairy. The underlying rationale is to identify through elimination foods that would cause inflammation or other poor health outcomes for that prescribed 30-day period. And that, unfortunately, to me, is a major red flag. So to me, I would say probably no with the Whole30. One, because it needlessly restricts broad categories of food, again, like paleo, without much scientific basis. And the foods that it limits are really nutrient dense. So our legumes, our whole grains, our dairy, unless you're lactose intolerant or you are like allergic to milk protein, most people really can and should enjoy these foods as part of a balanced diet. The strict rules of Whole30 and the need to purchase special Whole30 compliant products really limits how practical it is. It kind of prevents people from really living their lives. Having to like search on Amazon for this like specific kind of like mustard or mayo or whatever that's Whole30 approved gets tedious. It's not really sustainable. It can get expensive. And that 30-day time frame is a huge red flag. It's inherently short term. And we'll circle back to that idea later in the presentation, but I don't usually encourage anyone to do anything short term that they can't see themselves doing long term. Because whatever benefits you experience are going to be short term as well. And I've counseled many a client who really struggles. They tell me that Whole30 worked for them. They're so excited about how great they felt on it. But literally the day they went off of it, they ate like a dozen donuts and, really struggled to figure out that balance between eating Whole30 and kind of, what's next. They kind of struggled to figure out how to readjust to regular eating because it was so strict for such a short period of time. So if that was your experience with Whole30, again, I have so much compassion for you, and I hope you'll have some grace for yourself because, again, it was never meant to be long-term or sustainable. Okay, so gluten-free, that's been another one that's a pattern of eating or sort of a diet that's really exploded in the last few years. And the basis for the diet is you eliminate gluten, which is, a lot of people don't really know what it is. It's the protein that is naturally found in wheat, barley, and rye, and other wheat-related grains. And this is, in fact, eliminating gluten is an evidence-based dietary strategy for people with celiac disease. If you have celiac disease, gluten, that protein, irritates the lining of your intestines so that you can no longer absorb nutrition and you can end up getting malnourished. So if you have celiac disease, which is less than 1% of the population, you do have to completely restrict gluten forever. More recently, people are adopting it for a whole range of reasons, from trying to lower inflammation to trying to lose weight. And there really is pretty limited research supporting the need for a gluten-free diet outside of celiac disease. Some people do find that they feel better when they're restricting gluten. So there's this whole kind of research into what's considered like called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So the jury's still out on that one. There's certainly maybe people out there who are sensitive to gluten, that protein, that don't have full-blown celiac, and those people really may feel better without gluten in their diets. But again, the research doesn't fully support that. It's kind of ongoing. And so if that's you, and if you are, trying to limit your gluten intake, you want to be really careful about what you replace it with, because a lot of our gluten-free like carbohydrate alternatives, like our gluten-free breads or gluten-free crackers or gluten-free pastas, they're a lot lower in dietary fiber and a lot more heavily processed than their traditional counterparts, right? So your regular whole wheat bread might just have like one ingredient, whole wheat, and maybe some salt, and it has a few grams of fiber, a few grams of protein. It's a really nutritious choice, whereas your gluten-free bread might have a whole combination of like potato starch and brown rice flour and other grains and preservatives, and end up being really low in fiber and protein, which are two really important nutrients. So please read your labels and make sure you're choosing a nutritious option to replace the gluten-containing grains. And there's a lot of grains actually that are naturally gluten-free, which we'll get to on the next slide. But on the flip side, I guess if you aren't replacing those gluten-free, if you're not replacing those gluten-containing grains with heavily processed gluten-free alternatives, and instead you're, eating whole nutritious foods that are naturally gluten-free, fruits, vegetables, beans, and legumes, you really may experience some health benefits and feel really great, but it might be less about what you eliminated, the gluten, versus what you added, which is all these whole foods and nutrient-rich foods. So sometimes removing the gluten ends up just being a proxy for taking out a lot of empty carbs from your diet and replacing them with more nutritious options. So should you try it? Should you go gluten-free? If you have celiac disease, absolutely. If you think you fall into this category of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, some people that are having some GI issues that are trying to go for a more low FODMAP diet, gluten is considered a FODMAP, so a fermentable carbohydrate that can cause gas. But for the rest of us, for most of us, the research shows there really is no reason or benefit to eliminate gluten. It's certainly not going to promote weight loss. If you're replacing a gluten-containing grain with a gluten-free grain, the calories are the same. Potentially even you're getting less, again, like I said, fiber and protein. So it's not going to help you lose weight. That is just 100% true. But again, if you need to eliminate gluten, make sure you fuel your brain and your muscles with naturally gluten-free grains and other carb-rich foods. So your rice, like brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat. I know it has wheat in it, but it is like in the name, but it's not. It doesn't have gluten. Millet, amaranth, teff, sorghum, oats that haven't been cross-contaminated, potatoes, corn, peas, fruit, plus like your beans, your lentils. So there's lots of ways to get good carbs, even without gluten. WW, so formerly Weight Watchers, this is a decades-old program. Many of you may have tried this years in the past. Your parents may have tried it, in which users track points instead of tracking calories or other nutrients. In 2018, it rebranded itself as WW, in theory to shift the focus from weight to wellness, but it's still very much a weight loss program to encourage more healthy eating, and this is certainly a pro of the change. The most recent version, at least when I was doing the research for this presentation, includes a longer list of 0-point foods, and these 0-point foods are primarily those that are high in fiber and or protein. So all fruits and vegetables are now 0 points. Your lean proteins like egg whites and skinless poultry like chicken and turkey are 0 points. So I like that. I like that WW is encouraging people to eat more of these nutrient-rich foods, which by making them 0 points, that's exactly what they're doing. It's like, eat all this, it's promoting those healthier foods. But I do think it's a little bit misleading. So if your goal is weight loss, which I think most people doing whatever form of Weight Watchers, that's ultimately the goal. When it comes to successful weight loss, calories still count, right? You have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. And so you're not very likely to overconsume calories from the 0 point foods, but it is possible. So anyone who has like an issue with overeating, mindless eating, emotional eating, binge eating, if you find yourself doing that with some of these 0 point foods, like maybe fruits or turkey or eggs, again, not likely to do that with those foods, but you could in theory, right? So it's a little bit misleading, although it is well-intentioned. I do have clients that have been successful in Weight Watchers, but I would probably say to save your money, it's helpful to track something. And it's helpful to have a community. So those are two things that Weight Watchers does well. It gives you something to track, and it gives you a community of support. So, those two things are important to you. Maybe it's worth doing, but you could probably find both those benefits in other ways that would be free. So just some food for thought there. Okay, intermittent fasting. Here's another really, really trendy one that I can't really give a presentation in these days without somebody asking me about intermittent fasting. Unlike these other diets we've been talking about, it's not prescribing at all what to eat. It's prescribing when to eat. It's a timing strategy. And that term, intermittent fasting, actually refers to various different timing protocols. So one is alternate day fasting, where you're eating like free on certain days, and then on other days you're either completely fasting, you're eating like very, very low calorie to mimic fasting. There's the 5-2, where 5 days a week, I believe you're eating kind of like unlimited, and then 2 days a week is a complete fast. Or the most common variety is this time-restricted feeding, where you set a window that's anywhere from 4 hours to 12 hours that you can eat. And that's when people are referring to intermittent fasting, that's typically what they're talking about or what they've tried. Research suggests, and the research is fairly new since hasn't been around all that long, that it can be an effective tool, not a magic bullet, but a tool for weight loss or fat loss, primarily by restricting calorie intake, right? So here's how it works. If you are limiting the number of available hours that you can eat in the day, you may end up eating less calories overall. So going back to that calorie deficit, if you're eating fewer calories overall, that may lead to weight loss. And so that's how time-restricted feeding can be a tool for weight loss. But it's not this magic bullet on its own. It's this like tool that would maybe help people eat less. But on the other hand, other people may find that going long periods of time without food can lead to excessive hunger, feelings of deprivation, and then binge eating. So if you're eating more calories than you need, it doesn't matter if you're eating them in 4 hours or 8 hour window, you're still going to gain weight or at least not lose weight. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. There's nothing magical about eating in that 4 hour window, that 8 hour window. You can definitely overeat in that window. So you really have to understand that the calorie deficit is at kind of the foundation of all successful weight loss diets. And when it comes to health, what you choose to eat in that window matters too. So should you try it? It really depends. It really depends on your goals and how you're going about it. So whether intermittent fasting either promotes your weight loss goals or your health goals depends on what you choose to eat during your window. You also really want to think about the duration of your window and the timing of your window to make sure it fits into your lifestyle and is sustainable. Because again, if it's not a sustainable strategy, don't even bother doing it. Does it mean you can never eat, brunch with your friends or breakfast with your family? Does it mean you can't, you get home late from a workout or from work one night, you can't have dinner because you're outside your window? If it doesn't kind of fit into your lifestyle that way, it's not something I would recommend. The other thing I would say to kind of think about whether intermittent fasting is something you want to try is that it definitely takes you out of tune, further out of tune with your body's natural hunger and satiety cues. And so there's this whole other sort of approach to eating that's gaining traction called intuitive eating or mindful eating, which is all about actually listening to when your body's hungry, when your body's full, what it's craving. And people who eat in this way, that's actually been associated with long-term health, with weight management, with just overall improving your relationship with food. So like if you're watching the clock and you're actively not feeding yourself when you're hungry, or forcing yourself to consume your calories in this window, maybe you're, you don't want food. It's, it's just artificial kind of external rules around food, which again is sort of the opposite of what an approach that many people may find helpful. I would also be really careful with intermittent fasting if you have diabetes, pre-diabetes, or on medications that help manage your blood sugar, like insulin or metformin, because we know that eating at regular intervals throughout the day is key to keeping blood sugar steady, and people with diabetes could end up with really low blood sugar, which is dangerous, really high blood sugar, which is dangerous. So intermittent fasting could just have extra caution with it if you have issues like that. And if you are going to exercise, please do so in your feeding window to ensure that you have adequate energy and to prevent muscle breakdown. And this is actually a common misconception that I see all the time, where people exercising in the morning and then breaking their fast at noon. And you're really not optimizing your performance gains that way. We definitely get more out of our workouts, especially endurance, high intensity, and strength training, if we go in fueled and we refuel afterwards. And I had attended a sports nutrition conference a couple years ago that looked at research that was positive around intermittent fasting, that people were able to build muscle on it, and lose body fat on it. And those people, though, were exercising in their feeding window. They were not doing it in their fasting window. So definitely, if that's kind of your strategy, you want to rethink that.
Hey, Alyssa.
Yeah.
We have from the chat. We have one person who, I want to go back to the gluten part. If something is being triggered in the body, like rosacea or something like that, and if they wondered if gluten was a trigger, what are your suggestions for someone like that? And then I have another question for you.
Yeah, so anytime you think that a food might be triggering a symptom, you can do an elimination diet. I would work with a dietitian to do it, to make sure that you are not lacking any nutrients, that you're finding other foods to supply whatever nutrients you would be getting from that food you're restricting. But yeah, you could, if you think the gluten is triggering something, you can try eliminating it for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then reintroducing it. And see if your symptoms improved when you weren't eating it and they come back when you reintroduce it. Yeah, that's something that you don't want to have in your diet. But if you notice that either there was no improvement by eliminating it, or when you reintroduced it, your symptoms didn't come back, then there's no reason to eliminate it. We don't want to eliminate things unnecessarily, but there's absolutely a scientific way to go about it to see what the impact is. Good question.
And then the other one is, I tried intermittent fasting to prove to my friend it wouldn't work, but I have to say I felt great on the second day of the 2-day fast. I did this over a few months and it felt great every time. What made me feel so good?
So thanks for sharing that experience. And kind of like I said at the beginning, I'm not here to argue against anyone's lived experience. Somebody even though I recommend eating regularly throughout the day and not restricting food, you might have done that and felt really good. There's no science to show again that the gluten is inflammatory for most people. You may have restricted it and felt really good. So if that was your experience, and it's something you think is sustainable, and to fast every couple days every couple days every month, as long as you're getting a balance of nutrients on the other days, I'm not here to say don't do that. I don't really have an explanation for why you felt so good on it. Sometimes, people sometimes, feel a sense of euphoria or something. I can't really speak to, that really without knowing more about your diet, your lifestyle, what else was kind of going on with you. But
That's it.
yeah, I'd be careful. I'd be careful with fasting, especially if you're exercising. And you want to think about how many days you're doing it. But again, if more days you are eating and you're eating a balance of nutrients on those days, then I don't think it would be inherently dangerous, unless you maybe have diabetes or another health condition.
Okay. For you, Alyssa, and I'm interested in this one too, because I've kind of gone down the Ezekiel bread kind of sprouted grains before. What are your thoughts on sprouted grains, like in some of the breads, like Ezekiel bread? I know I've gone and done that before, bread, but what are your recommendations on that? I know sugars is a thing in bread sometimes too, and yeah.
Yeah, so those are sort of two separate questions. You do want to look for breads and grain products in general that are less processed, and have more nutrition. So I always say look at like the dietary fiber and the protein. Make sure there's a few grams of each. You might want to look at the ingredients list, make sure it's whole grains, and that's where you can also see if there's been added sugar, and that could be in the form of honey or molasses. So if you're trying to limit added sugar, that's something that absolutely can be found in a lot of processed foods, including bread. So you would, want to look at the ingredients list and make sure that that's not the case. The sprouted grains is sort of another thing, separate from the added sugar. There's some studies to suggest that sprouted grains are better absorbed, than other whole grains. So, you might be getting more nutritional bang for your buck from breads that the grains are sprouted versus just whole grains. So, that's certainly something to try. I think the Ezekiel bread, I know it's expensive, and I think it has to be frozen maybe. So, those are two considerations. I don't think there's anything wrong with just, whole wheat bread, or I really like the Dave's Killer bread also that's made with a bunch of different whole grains, but there's definitely nothing like inherently dangerous about or negative about the Ezekiel bread. I just don't also think it's I don't think it's necessary if it's out for whatever reason it's outside of your like financial means, or it's not convenient to have to buy something that needs to be frozen. I think there's plenty of other options too.
And we have two more questions, but I'll let you continue, and then we'll bring those up. We'll let you get through a couple more.
Yeah, I mean, unless do you think they're more related to what we've talked about?
Well, yeah, one of them is more with the intermittent fasting. Do you have a stance on not eating past a certain time at night, say 7 p.m., based on, bedtimes, things like that? Or do you discourage late night, evening snacking eating? So what would you say about that? And then the other one was, what do you recommend eating before exercise?
Oh, those are two really good questions, and they are related to intermittent fasting. So I don't have a hard and fast rule about eating at night. I think the time that you want to stop eating has to work with your lifestyle. If you're someone who's up until midnight working, you're going to need fuel in those hours between 7 and midnight. Maybe you need to have a snack or at 9 or 10 if you're up until 12. If you are working out in the evening and you come home and it's 8 or 9, that's when you're going to have dinner, which is your post-workout meal. You're gonna benefit more from refueling at that time, than skipping that meal and not your muscles aren't going to recover. You're going to wake up hungry. So I don't have a hard and fast time that I would say everyone needs to cut off food. There's no time that like if you eat after a certain point, all those calories are going to be stored as fat. That's just not how it works. You're going to gain body fat if you overconsume calories no matter what time of day you eat them. That said, knowing that food is fuel, and it's advantageous for us to consume it during the day when we're active, both physically and mentally, so that we are energized, right? We want to have food and fuel during the day when we need it, not to not have it at night, but maybe we have less at night and shift some of those calories early in their day so we feel energized. So that's one thing to think about. And then the last thing is, are we snacking after dinner, and what role is that playing. So is it habit? Is it emotional eating? Is it, comforting ourselves after a long, hard day? If we're over consuming nutrient poor snack foods in the evening after dinner, and that's in addition to our other meals and snacks during the day, that might be a habit that is interfering with your goals. And so that's certainly something to look at. But the issue isn't that you're eating after 8 p.m. The issue is that in those later hours, you're consuming extra nutrient poor foods. So yeah, again, it's less about the time and more about like what you're eating at those hours and why. I hope that makes sense. But like you can absolutely have like a planned, nutritious, maybe high protein meal or snack in the evening if because of your lifestyle and your schedule you need that. And then pre-workout, okay, totally depends on time of day, type of exercise, how long it's been since you've eaten your last meal. But typically, carbs are the preferred fuel for exercise. The closer you are to your workout, the more simple you want those carbs to be. So if it's like 30 minutes before you're going to go for like, a run or hit the gym and you realize it's been hours since you've had anything to eat, just grab something like a banana or some raisins or even like an applesauce or some crackers just to give your body some quick carbs, a granola bar. But otherwise, I would say think an hour or two before and have more of like a balanced meal or snack. Something that has carbs, but also a little bit of protein. So like if you were exercising at your lunch hour, maybe you have a mid-morning snack like a banana and some string cheese or an apple and some peanut butter. Maybe if you're exercising in the afternoon, like after work, you have like, a protein bar that has some carbs and protein in the afternoon, or you have some crackers and tuna, so you have some carbs and some protein. But definitely trying to like think a few hours ahead because you don't want to go into your workout like stuffed. And it can be helpful for people to limit fat and fiber right before a workout. So fat and fiber are going to they're going to be slower to digest and cause a little bit of GI distress. So that's why I typically say the closer you are to exercise, the simpler your carbs should be. A piece of fruit is always a good place to start because you're getting good carbs for energy, but also a lot of other nutrition. Okay, really, really, really good questions. All right, so let's power on through the rest of our diets. The next one we're going to talk about is a vegan diet. And plant-based eating, I think this has become increasingly popular, even since when I made these slides. The most strict form of plant-based eating would be a vegan diet. Now, in a vegan diet, you restrict all animal products, so no meat, no poultry, no fish or seafood, no eggs, no dairy. So if a vegan diet focuses on a lot of really nutrient-dense whole foods, it is definitely associated with positive health outcomes, particularly cardiovascular health and cancer risk. But I always need to make clear that a vegan diet is in no way synonymous with a healthy diet. Just like with intermittent fasting, like it all comes down to what food you actually choose to eat. There's plenty of foods that you could eat on a vegan diet that offer very little or no nutrition. There's tons of vegan junk foods, snack foods, cookies, chips, French fries. My favorite example is always Oreos. Not that like you can't incorporate those foods into a balanced diet. You can and you should, but like I just kind of like to kind of debunk this idea that like vegan and healthy is synonymous. It's not. Vegan, all it means is it's plant-based. And it's no animal products. It doesn't mean it's healthy. It can be, though. It can be. You have to be even more conscientious about what foods you choose to eat on a vegan diet to make sure it is indeed health promoting and that you don't miss out on key nutrients. For the most part, I believe more plants is almost always going to be beneficial. So more fruits, more vegetables, more whole grains, more beans. You don't necessarily have to completely eliminate animal protein, though, to reap the benefits of eating more plants on your health. And if you are eating a really strict vegan diet, you may experience some nutrient deficiencies that you might need to supplement. B12 and iron being two that come to mind, also calcium. You can get iron in some plant-based foods, but it's not as well absorbed by any means, the non-heme iron. And then calcium, which is best found in dairy foods, is going to be fortified in some vegan alternatives, and it's going to be naturally found in like beans and some dark leafy greens, but maybe not the levels that you'd be getting if you were consuming dairy. So just kind of be aware of that. Okay, so the D.A.S.H diet, I don't know if anyone's familiar with this one. It stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, and it's an eating pattern that's promoted by a number of health and governmental agencies to help people prevent or manage high blood pressure. So high blood pressure or hypertension is something that affects millions of Americans, and it's a major risk factor for heart attack, stroke, and kidney disease. So it's really, really, really common. Probably you or someone you know right at this moment is dealing with high blood pressure. So with D.A.S.H, it encourages us to consume foods that are naturally low in sodium and high in potassium. We know that when we eat more sodium, our blood vessels expand. That puts more stress on or pressure on our blood vessels. That's what high blood pressure is. And it stresses our heart. But potassium kind of works against sodium. So we eat more fruits and vegetables, we eat more whole grains, we eat more low-fat dairy on a D.A.S.H style pattern. And then we limit our higher sodium foods, so our processed meats, like sausage and even deli meats, cheese, frozen foods, canned soups, packaged snack foods, and a lot of condiments. So sodium is a preservative. Basically, it's going to be found in a lot of prepared and processed foods. And with D.A.S.H, the recommendation is to cook more at home, because then you have more control of your preparation methods, and you can season your foods with herbs, spices, onions, and garlic instead of salt, which is sodium. Should you try it? Maybe. And the reason I say that is that a lot of people would benefit from adopting the principles of D.A.S.H, because the majority of sodium or salt is consumed through meals eaten out and processed foods, not the salt shaker. And most Americans actually do fall far short of recommended levels of fruits and vegetables. So if you're trying to follow more of a D.A.S.H style of eating, it's going to be beneficial. And also it's science-based, and it's broad enough to be followed long term. Doesn't overly restrict any foods or nutrients. So it's not like a diet in the way that it, like what it says you have to have and not have. It's more of like guidelines of a pattern that would be beneficial. Sort of on a similar vein would be the Mediterranean style diet. And people that are familiar with this love it because it is known to include dark chocolate and red wine, primarily because these foods have polyphenols and antioxidants in them, which we know are anti-inflammatory and promote heart health and longevity. It's less of a diet, kind of like D.A.S.H, and more of a healthy eating pattern based on foods that are traditionally consumed in Mediterranean parts of the world, like Greece and Italy. It is backed by a plethora of research and is associated with heart health and longevity, among other benefits. The emphasis is on lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, beans and legumes, heart-healthy unsaturated fat from fish, olive oil, and nuts, and then small amounts of poultry and dairy. And yes, it does include dark chocolate and red wine. And the cool thing about the Mediterranean diet is that it also includes lifestyle-related recommendations like savoring your food and sharing meals with others, which is really important. So should you try it? Yes. I mean, truly, it's a style of eating that promotes long-term health. It's research-based. It's sustainable and it's flexible. It's not restrictive, and it provides ample nutrients that we would need for energy, performance, and recovery, and just optimal health. So there's really no red flags when it comes to the Mediterranean style of eating. And then the Mind Diet, I think this is the last one that we're going to talk about before we move on to the next section of the presentation. It combines elements of D.A.S.H and Mediterranean eating patterns. The special focus is on foods that are really high in antioxidants and other nutrients that are known to positively impact brain health. So that's really the idea. It's like for cognitive brain health, cognitive function, longevity, things like that. So in addition to those antioxidants, it encourages omega-3 rich fish and seafood, leafy greens, berries, nuts, whole grains, and then our beans, lentils, and legumes. So really, again, these nutrient-rich foods. And it recommends lower consumption of red meat, sweets, and fried foods. Should you try it? Sure. I guess sort of like Mediterranean, it's it's an eating pattern that's full of nutrient-dense foods that really anybody would benefit from. And at the same time, it's encouraging you to limit empty calories from refined carbs and the saturated fat that you get from red meat. So these changes are things that are only going to enhance your health, and there's nothing gimmicky or unsustainable about the Mind diet. Okay, so those are 10. I know there's probably some others that have come out that you might be curious about, but I think that kind of covers a lot of our bases. The next section, we're going to talk about, like, if you are thinking about a diet, what are the considerations that you want to think about? It's not just whether it works. What does that even mean? And does it work for you? So before we get into this section, I just wanted to see if anyone has other questions so far. Yes, some good ones already. Okay, we'll have some time later too. So here are some factors to think about. What is the goal of the diet, and is the diet effective in achieving that goal? So a lot of times we think about diets with the primary goal being weight loss, and that is typically what most people are seeking when they go about trying a diet, but it might not be the main goal of you or the diet. There might be other targeted health outcomes. So like, you might be making dietary changes to manage diabetes or to lower your blood pressure, cholesterol, like with the D.A.S.H diet. Maybe the goal is improving digestion, right? So like if you are eliminating gluten or FODMAPs or dairy, maybe that's your goal. Maybe it has nothing to do with weight loss. So, think about like what the diet is purported to do and what you're actually trying to achieve from following it, and make sure they line up. Is it evidence-based, and does it promote health? So is it consistent with nutrition is an evolving science, but it is a science. So is this diet or this, pattern of eating aligned with what research shows are principles of a health-promoting, disease-preventing dietary pattern? I think that can be an issue with maybe a diet that's restricting whole grains, or that's restricting fruit, where we know that beans, where we know that those are foods that should be incorporated into a health promoting diet. Are there any red flags? So how extreme or restrictive is it? Is it eliminating broad categories of foods or nutrients where you could potentially end up with a nutritional deficiency, or it's just so restricted that you can't really follow it? It's not practical for you long term. Is it practical? Is it accessible? Is it affordable? So does it require purchasing special foods online or special supplements? Does it mean you're going to be spending endless hours prepping or cooking? Does it mean you're never going to be able to like eat at a restaurant or go to a dinner party? Is following this diet interfering with you living a full, balanced life? I think that the goal of making changes to our diet or our food intake is to optimize our health and optimize our quality of life, right? So if following that diet does the opposite, I do think that's a red flag and really something to think about. If it's causing us more stress, then it's, adding to our health. Is it sustainable? Like, can you see yourself eating this way forever? And if not, I would say, yeah, really think twice before starting. So now that I have those kind of considerations or criteria or things to think about on your mind, let's just take a step back and look at why diets inherently may be problematic. So like I mentioned earlier, any diet, if the goal is weight loss, and again, that is not always the goal of people that are making dietary changes, but if the goal is weight loss, know that any diet that results in a calorie deficit will work as far as promoting weight loss in the short term, as long as you can stick to it. So, if you can stick to the rules of a diet and sticking to those rules puts you in a deficit, it will work to the extent that it'll help you lose weight. But it's not realistic for most of us to follow any rules regarding our diet forever. Most diets really are inherently unsustainable. So if the diet is short term, the results are short term, the benefits are short term. So, assuming the weight loss is the goal, I would argue that a diet hasn't really worked if you regain the weight. And that's oftentimes when clients are finally ready to work with a dietitian, they're like, I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this, it's all worked, but then they either regain, the weight or even gain more. And so to me, that doesn't mean the diet worked. I mean, that because working is sustainable results. And just always keep in mind that dieting is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So, take everything you hear with a grain of salt, especially diets that have you purchasing like special food and supplements and programs and things like that. So, because diets are inherently unsustainable, many people find themselves caught in a cycle of yo-yo dieting, and they're repeatedly losing and regaining weight. If that is your experience, please know you are not alone. And the problem is not you. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you're not disciplined. The problem is just this mentality about diets. Diets were never intended to be sustainable. And so the fact that you couldn't sustain them is not your fault. It's just inherent with the diet. And we do know more and more research is coming out too about just how negative the impact of chronic dieting and that yo-yo cycling with our weight is on both physical and mental health. Dieting is actually the #1 risk factor for developing an eating disorder or really just disordered eating. You don't have to have like a diagnosed eating disorder to have issues with food, right? And a lot of times if we've started dieting or, being influenced by diet culture early on in our lives, we do have some level of disordered eating or sort of a disordered relationship with food. So here's the diet cycle that I think is really common that many people have experienced. So you restrict your food, you go on a diet, you follow rules, you're restricting calories, nutrients, food groups. That leads to feelings of deprivation, maybe even obsession. And there's actually, there's been research that's been done on people who had to follow a reduced calorie diet to observe what happened. And they became obsessed with food, hoarding food, had weird food rituals that they developed. Even though the diet was imposed on them, it wasn't something they chose. So, but anyone who's ever tried to cut something out knows that it leads to you wanting it more, right? So when you eventually give into that craving, you may end up overeating or binge eating because you've put that food on a pedestal. That then induces feelings of shame, guilt, and failure. Maybe you regain some weight. And that reinforces the solution in your mind because of diet culture is, oh, well, I need to go on a diet again. I need to try it again, start fresh, start over, try a new diet. So we go back, we restrict something else, and then the whole cycle starts over again. And we're caught in it. And so again, if that's been your experience, you are certainly not alone. But what do we do? What else? What are some other ways that we can even begin to think about food and nutrition and feeding ourselves without following a diet? So I just have some principles that I'll share with you. And some of it will, I think, overlap a little bit with what we talked about last time about balance, really. We talked about, balanced eating last week. So before we get into this next section, which are going to be kind of your takeaways, anybody have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, we have a couple in the chat here.
Okay.
Let's see here. First one we have is on the Weight Watchers diet. Community and tracking was mentioned. What other communities have you found that can be helpful in promoting a healthy diet? What are good food tracking methods? And then what literature would you recommend to learn more? Ryan, there is a program called Naturally Slim that is available to Cox employees. That's through your HR group. But that is more mindful eating and tools of that sort. And then MyFitnessPal was mentioned in the chat. That's a great one that we use here at the Cox Fitness Centers with challenges that we do. But I'll turn it over to Alyssa to give you some other pointers on some communities or how, things that she finds helpful for promoting a healthy diet and food tracking and such.
So MyFitnessPal would be one way to track. There's other apps like Lose It. There's some photo tracking apps. There's a whole bunch of different apps now You could even just use like a food journal, or take photos on your phone, or use the note section on your phone. I think if you're actively trying to make changes to your diet, it can be it can be helpful to monitor in some way. So having some form of monitoring, and I definitely have clients that just use a journal and they find that really helpful. As far as support groups, it's a little bit trickier now, especially with COVID, but I do think that you could, I don't actually have any I can like recommend off the top of my head, to be honest. I think, I would have to do a little bit of searching to find that. I mean, I do know there's some psychologists that lead support groups for people that are recovering from disordered eating, but not necessarily people that are, seeking weight loss. Definitely some companies have things that are like Amy mentioned, companies have groups that are organized. There's a lot of just like, some of you might honestly have better ideas than I do. I feel like there's probably a lot of like Facebook groups and meetups and things like that are happening online. I know there's dietitians that lead support groups that you could find out about, like if they have a social media presence. But I think that like Facebook groups are probably, and there's, those types of things are probably most accessible right now. There's definitely also like Alcoholics Anonymous equivalent with overeaters, but again, that would take a sort of a specific type of person and type of issue.
And if you are interested in that, I do have a contact for that group. So just to put that out there, you can email me after if you are interested in that kind of Overeaters Anonymous and whatnot. I do have a contact for that. And then, like she said, Facebook groups. Yeah, those are great support groups. And then one-on-one sessions with Alyssa, if you're interested in that. She can give you more specific tools to use and look at your needs specifically with, risk factors that you may have, or specific to exercise regimens, things like that. And then, follow-ups with her too. That's another way to have a support system, of course. Another question that I have is, I've heard about the 21-day smoothie diet where 2 smoothies are consumed and 1 light meal daily. What are the pros and cons of this diet, and do you recommend this type of diet? Alyssa, you want to take that one? And then we got 1 or 2 more on the chat.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with that particular diet. I would say, as far as pros and cons, it would, if the goal is weight loss, it would most likely regulate your calories, because it's kind of being very specific about what you're eating. So again, strict calorie deficit will lead to weight loss. Red flag for me would be sustainability. It's 21 days, right? So it's got like a built-in time frame. You're definitely not going to eat 2 smoothies for breakfast and lunch for the rest of your life. But a smoothie can be a balanced meal, and it can be a convenient meal, as long as it has, remember we talked about last week the components of a balanced meal, like carbs, protein, fat, veggies. So if your smoothie has some greens, it's got a protein source, so maybe Greek yogurt or protein powder, it's got some fruit for carbs, and it's maybe got some seeds or nuts for fat, a smoothie can be a balanced meal. Whether you need to have 2 a day for 21 days to benefit from that, would be probably not, in my opinion. Again, I guess my red is at 21 day.
Okay, we have another question. What are your thoughts on, I think it's NOOM, N-O-O-M?
Oh, no.
I guess that's it.
N-O-O-M, new, yeah, so that's like, I understand it's like a program that's available. It's like an app online. It's based on like behavioral principles, so it's helping you develop like healthy habits and sort of like taking a more psychological approach to making changes to your eating. It's very much weight loss focused. It's my understanding is people would try NOOM if they were trying to lose weight, but definitely take a different approach as far as My understanding is it's less about like, these are foods, this is how many calories to eat, and more about like almost rewiring your habits, which is helpful. I don't know, but I think addressing behaviors and habits around eating is really important. You might be better off working with a dietitian and whoever the kind of counselors are they set you up with on Noom. But yeah, depending on your goals and your history with food, it could be beneficial.
Awesome. Well, that's about it in the chat. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions that they can think of. And I think it's important to also
We're
say,
basically right out.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, we're over our hour, and I want to make sure we get through everything. I mean, if people want to stay on, that's cool. But I also respect your guys' time, and know probably a lot of you need to get on with your day. So, what do you think we should do? Should we kind of try to get through these last few?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I guess I just want to like circle back and actually give people some next steps. So like, now I've talked the pros and cons of diet, but hopefully convinced you that in the short-term diets aren't really sustainable. And if you're looking for lasting benefits, maybe we want to rethink just the idea of a diet. But then what's next, right? So what do I actually do? I do want to just wrap this up without kind of giving you some thoughts. So here are just some principles to kind of take with you. And again, you'll have access to these slides. So if you have to jump off the call, I totally understand. But the first principle would be to reduce black or all or nothing thinking, which is pretty much inherent to diets. Some foods are more nutritious than others. That is 100% true. The foods aren't inherently good or bad. And you're not good or bad for making certain choices. So like, there's no point in kind of beating yourself up with this, like, shame and guilt. I was good, I was bad. Like, no, there's no morality here. No single food or nutrient is going to break your health. Eating consistently and looking at our overall pattern of eating. So, just by having like kale or cheese, celery juice, right, or you're like, whatever the latest thing is, that single change isn't what's going to impact your health. You've got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And on the flip side, having something with high fructose corn syrup once in a while, or dairy or gluten, is absolutely not going to like completely destroy your health, right? It's about balance. Which takes us to our next point, balance and moderation. And I know we talked about this a lot last week, but really all foods that you enjoy and aren't allergic to can and should fit into a balanced diet. That's what makes it sustainable, that you're able to have your red wine, your chocolate cake, your fried food, whatever it is. Mainly we want to focus on nutrient-dense whole foods for health, but then we also want to make room for these treats. Food is fuel, but it's also a source of pleasure. And so if we try to just think of it as fuel and deny that it can also be pleasure, that's not realistic, and so that's not sustainable. So how often and what quantities you want to include treats into your eating pattern, that's going to be up to you, and it's going to be what your goals are. So balance and moderation really do look different for everyone. We definitely want to eat a variety of foods. Different foods and food groups offer different essential nutrients. So the best way to ensure nutrition deficiencies is to aim to get around all our meals, and definitely throughout the day and throughout the week. I say be as least restrictive as you can. That way you can choose either the most nutritious foods from each or ones you like the best. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, to think about a variety of colors, since each of the different colors are different nutrient. And then variety also prevents boredom. So, if we get bored with the food choices, we're eating the same grilled chicken, roasted sweet potato, steamed broccoli, we're not going to stick to that way of eating, and so we're not going to, reap the benefits. It's not going to be sustainable. From a nutrition standpoint, I do think prioritizing plants and protein are two takeaways that I always recommend to people. whether your goal is weight loss or just optimal energy, almost everyone can benefit from focusing on these two principles. But again, in a balanced way. So more plants doesn't have to mean exclusively plants. I'm not telling you have to go eat a vegan diet to benefit from trying to get more plants. That you're going to benefit from the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals, all those antioxidants and other phytochemicals that are really associated with health and lower disease rates. So again, it's not all plants, but like, can you, double your portion of vegetables at lunch? Can you have a side salad with dinner? Can you have an apple with string cheese instead of chips or a snack? Okay. And then protein. So protein is critical. It plays a lot of really important roles in our body. It keeps us satisfied. It decreases our hunger between meals, so that may help maintain healthy blood sugar and energy levels. So when you're eating protein consistently throughout the day, you definitely have much more stable blood sugar and energy. Helps you preserve your lean body mass and your metabolism, and then it supports recovered exercise. Lots of reasons to make sure you're getting protein in. And then mindful eating, earlier, it's kind of the opposite of intuitive eating, opposite intermittent fasting. But really, what mindful eating means is a practice of paying attention to your hunger and satiety cues, but also the food you're eating. And there's a lot of research showing that it can dramatically improve your relationship with food. So to try to get started with it, the first thing would be to kind of slow down. Instead of eating while you're distracted, while you're driving, while you're working, while you're watching TV, just paying attention to the food, noticing the taste, the temperature, the texture. Again, limiting distraction, multitasking, and then trying to create a pleasant eating environment. And then keep perspective. So remembering that food is fuel, but it also can and should be a source of pleasure, not integral to our social lives, our family, maybe cultural and religious experiences, celebrations, tradition, history. So if your diet is interfering with to enjoy your life or even just live, that is certainly a red flag. So these are the principles of sort of a non-diet approach to healthy eating. Kind of just went through all of them. And here's the takeaway. And again, if you're still on the call, stay with nutrition is a science, but it's also in practice highly individualized. There's definitely no one-size-fits-all approach to healthy eating that's going to work for everyone. But before you choose to adopt a new style of eating, carefully consider whether it fits your lifestyle, your food preferences, and your goals. And remember that ultimately, following any type of diet rules long-term isn't realistic. And so you're going to potentially end up getting caught in that. So try to find a pattern of eating that allows you to feel and perform your best, eating foods you enjoy, and that you can really practice long-term as part of a healthy and sustainable lifestyle. Easier said than done, I know. So, of course, that is why registered dietitians do one-on-one counseling in addition to group education, because, yeah, putting it in all these principles into practice, figuring out moderation and balance, that it's going to look really different for everyone. I do offer, one-on-one sessions. I think it's mostly virtual at this point for Cox employees, that you can shoot me an email if you're interested in more support. And again, thank you for tuning in this afternoon. Thank you for your great questions. I don't really feel like in the sake of time, I can take many more, but I guess if anyone has anything burning, I'll try to address it.
Nothing in the chat, so we'll just wrap things up. If anyone has any questions later, you can email Alyssa or myself once I send the deck and the recording out. So thank you, Alyssa, so much for the presentation. Yep, absolutely. There is no magic potion, unfortunately. Thank you for that. But thank you so much, Alyssa. And again, Alyssa does one-on-one consultations. Let us know if you're interested in that as well. Anything else, Alyssa?
No, that's it. Thank you guys so much. I hope this was helpful. Yeah, thanks for sharing your afternoon once again to learn about nutrition.
Yep. Thank you, guys. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Get out and enjoy the beautiful weather.